Hey everybody, welcome to the I303 podcast, where we share ingenious insights and oddball opinions from the perspective of an IO. Today I have Taylor Sullivan with me, and we're going to be talking about AI, IO, and the future of work. So with that said, Taylor, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about yourself and tell us about your origin story.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I've been in the assessment space and mostly pre-hire context, but have moved post-hire for about the last 15 years. And I started my career at the Human Resources Research Organization, HUMRO, where I spent 10 years building high stakes, high visibility assessments, mostly for use in federal agencies and the military. Um, and then I discovered the world of tech startups and working in product and the pace and being at the edge of innovation and working in software with engineers. Really, I caught the bug.
Yeah.
And so I've been in the software space for about 4 years now, and just love it. And so I currently work at Workera, which is an AI native verified skills intelligence platform. So we use AI native assessments coupled with personalized learning paths and continuous measurement to build capabilities in today's rapidly evolving workplace. So I suppose my origin story started way before I found the world of IO, but I'll keep it professional for now.
There you go. And so for our listeners who don't know, can you share what are pre-hire assessments, what are post-hire assessments, and what's the difference between the two, if there is one?
Sure. So if you take the point of someone being hired, a pre-hire assessment is usually a test or an interview or really
Mm,
any evaluation that you go through in the process of trying to get a job. So who's taking the assessment differs. We're usually looking at job candidates, not current employees, although promotional assessments can be considered pre-hire. So with pre-hire assessments, there's a big decision that's coming at the end of it. And we've all been on the job market. We've all participated in a pre-hire assessment most likely. And you know that when you're going into it, even if it's an interview or a recruiter screen, your nerves are high
yeah.
and you really care about the outcome, and it has the potential to impact your livelihood and your self-esteem and all those things. And so for that reason, we also typically refer to pre-hire assessments as being high stakes because the stakes are high depending on the output. So I want to contrast that with post-hire, which in some cases can still be quite high stakes, as I mentioned, promotional assessments, performance reviews, those kinds of things. Most of the assessments that I'm working on these days are more in the learning and development space. So the stakes are a little lower. If you mess up or don't perform well, those insights are just as helpful to you as if you performed well. And so the consequences of not performing well aren't dire, and it's not usually going to impact your professional standing or your salary or your ability to get a job. So I really love being in that space because we can be really creative and go outside the box, color outside the lines a little bit. Pre-hire assessments tend to be more legally scrutinized, and they have to be designed in a certain way and validated in a certain way that often means they're slower to develop. And so in the post-hire space, though, you can really spin up some innovative measurements. And, when the purpose is describing someone's skills versus predicting someone's job performance, again, you can color outside of the lines a bit.
Yeah. So one of the things I really like about pre-hire assessments, I often get asked, so what's the point for non-IO native individuals? Why do people do them? Why are they delivered? Why do they go to so much trouble in creating them? So the analogy I use, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is, and it may be extreme, but let's roll with it. So imagine you're going to marry someone and you're going to make the decision to marry or not to marry based on one conversation. Kind of doesn't make sense. The same holds true partially in a work environment where, in some cases, that work relationship will outlast the marriage relationship. And so like to your point, the stakes are just as high, if not higher. And so for me, it makes sense to have either multiple conversations, multiple ways to determine if, when it comes back to marriage, if this person has the right skills, the right qualities, the right characteristics, if you will, to be in this marriage, you want to have multiple data points to make that decision. The same should hold true in the workplace, where the more data we have, the more information we have, the better decision we can make. And so when I kind of phrase it in that term, individuals who are kind of outside of the IO world, they get much more, oh, that kind of opens their minds and they see the rationale behind that.
Yeah, I guess unless they're big fans of that show, Married at
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or
But yeah,
blind,
that
what
makes a
is
lot
it?
of sense. And I also think it when you start to peel the onion back a bit, it matters the contents of that conversation. Like, would you marry someone based on what your friends said or where they went to college or, you know,
Yeah,
some kind of
yeah,
abstract detail that
yeah,
you really can't infer if they're going to be a, a loyal partner,
yeah,
you know, someone who will treat you with respect and compassion. And so what you're really wanting to do is measure their skills
yeah,
and measure their compatibility and their fit with you. And so it's the same in a lot of workplace assessment. We're not, the goal is to not just go off what degree someone has or what college they went to or, you know, who knows who and who's
yeah,
somebody's cousin's best
yeah,
friend,
yeah, yeah.
but rather what is their skill profile? What do they bring to the relationship between the employee and the employer? And are they a good fit for that? Do they complement the fit? Do they bring new things to the table? um, do they will their skill set enable them to thrive?
Yeah. So I've been talking to a colleague of mine, and I'm really curious to get your thoughts on this. So to your point, should we get someone else's perspective? So going back to the marriage analogy, does it make sense to get someone else's perspective on if I should marry someone? So I'm going to tie this back to work, reference checks. For me, and I'm going to balance these two back and forth. So from a marriage perspective, for me as a potential suitor, would it make sense if I were looking for a wife to interview my prospective wife's previous boyfriends and making the determination if I should have this person? I don't know if that's the best route because their relationship is unique to them. Their dynamic, the way they decided to, partner together, it may not translate to the type of relationship that would work for me and my new prospective wife. So that's why I don't, I'm split when it comes to reference checks. What
I
are your
guess
thoughts?
I
Yeah.
guess I get it, but the
Tell me
difference
more.
is
Yeah.
that ex-boyfriend
Yeah.
would have had a lot of opportunities at the same time
Mm,
to
okay.
observe the girlfriend as being a girlfriend to lots of other people. And so they would have probably had a chance to triangulate their experience and kind of localize what they're experiencing with what other people are experiencing. And maybe that's true. Maybe that person has seen how she treated her family, how she treated her kids, how she treated her employees or her boss. And so we're collecting data about other relationships besides our own when we're in a relationship with someone. And
Yeah.
so I think to me, that's if you expand it a little bit, it is more, you know, along those lines. And also, one key difference is there may be some bad blood between
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
two. And usually
Exactly.
people
Yeah.
won't put
Yeah.
a reference that they have bad blood with.
Gotcha.
When I do reference checks, also, it's less at that point, it's usually far into the assessment process. And so I'm quite confident in this person. And really, you know, the conversation that I want to have with their reference is not so much as, you know, help me catch things that we may have missed, and more, how can I help set this person up for success? Where do they thrive? Where do they struggle? You know, what have you seen this person get really frustrated with, and how can I help coach them and help them grow? So it depends on like your use of it, I suppose. Like if you were going to the boyfriend to say like, I'm really struggling with this situation, can you help me think through it? Maybe legitimate.
Okay. Yeah. So bringing it back, you mentioned in your origin story, Workera, AI native company. AI native. What does that mean? I've heard the term, but for in layman's terms, can you describe what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, certainly. So I'll try not to get too technical,
Yeah.
because when I get too technical, I get out further than, you know, outside my own, or what is it? When I get too technical, I get out ahead of my own skis. Um, I'll contrast it with some of the other products and software systems that I've worked on. So most software systems are built in a traditional tech stack. They're being driven by code that is written inside a code base. That code base is rather static. It can certainly be changed, augmented, refactored, cleaned up. Um, And the behavior of that system is pretty deterministic. Like, you know that if it follows this line of code, this is going to happen. When ChatGPT came out, that certainly wasn't the first time, folks had experimented with Gen AI, but it was the first time that it was really democratized through the user-friendly interface of ChatGPT. And so at that point, some software platforms probably freaked out, like, this is a threat to, people, especially in the assessment world. This is a threat. It's people can use it to cheat. People, this exposes us. I saw that then evolve a bit to how can we bring it into our product? Let's add a chat bot. Let's add, some light AI features. But for the most part, those tend to be more like bolt-on features where it's not actually part of the tech stack or the infrastructure. It's like a module that's a bell or whistle that's kind of hanging on the side. So while that certainly gives the user a bit of the experience of AI and harnesses the power of AI in a way, it still is very limited in terms of being able to leverage the full power of AI. And I really came to experience this limitation, and it began to feel like a ceiling. It felt like there should be more, and that we should be able to more deeply embed this technology into our platform so that the user could feel and experience the full power of AI.
Yeah.
And so when Workera approached me about what they had going on, my ears really perked up, because they had made a very bold decision to pretty much stop work on their traditional legacy platform and rebuild, and I'll use the cliche term, but it really is accurate here, reimagine what a tech stack and what a software architecture and infrastructure could look like. And so we've infused our tech stack with AI. So when we think of a code base, ours is now featuring a prompt library. And so the behavior is less deterministic. And while we can certainly still build in hard code and have deterministic paths where needed, we are really able to open the aperture in other places where that variety and that personalization and that kind of natural feel of the software is critical for the user experience, but even more for our ability to measure skills. It's hard to measure skills with a really static, rigid assessment, or even a conversational assessment that's rigid, because you have to pre-program everything. But if you can speak to an agent, if you can talk with an agent, if an agent can make decisions around what is the user saying to me, how are they performing, what decisions are they making, what is their reasoning process, the agent is intelligent and can reflect that in their assessment process. They know when to probe more, they know when to kind of hang back or maybe give a little hint or clue to nudge someone along. So from the assessment standpoint, I think that's a good manifestation of what that infrastructure does. So it moves far beyond a chatbot, and it really drives the core purpose of the software.
Yeah. And so from a user perspective, let's say I were taking an assessment using AI, and there were 5 other candidates who were applying for the same position. They also were taking part in an assessment process. Traditionally, all 5 individuals would have the exact same assessment, theoretically measuring the exact same thing. But it sounds as though AI can customize or make it more nuanced to each individual, depending on, this is going to sound weird, the conversation they're having. And so although we're all applying and being assessed for the same position, it's not exactly the same for every person. Would that be fair to say?
I think that's possible.
Okay.
And then, we use our measurement expertise to decide
Gotcha.
how much of that variation is desirable. But you can compare it to a human-to-human interview. No human-to-human interview is going to be exactly the same. The interviewer may probe or go kind of conversational in certain sections where they may stick to a more rigid script in others. So in the pre-hire space, I think there is probably a little less wiggle room for, completely non-deterministic, free-flowing assessments. Though it is quite easy to take a strong assessment template and do some light tailoring with AI so that it's good for a certain role and can be used with all of the candidates, but it's very relevant. And so it's more cost efficient to build out an interview protocol with AI, for example. But then again, you're comparing people against each other in that case. Whereas if you take a learning and development standpoint or more of that post-hire, you may not be comparing people against each other. You may be comparing them against a skill target. The organization knows we need our people at this skill level to be able to accomplish these business goals. Or you could be comparing against yourself. Like, I had this score and now I need to have this score. And so what do I need from this experience to get me there? And so the means is the AI assessor with some nudges and some learning. It's the means to an end versus, the goal is not comparison to
Yeah.
other people.
So when looking at the post-hire world, as you were sharing that, the thing that popped into my head is this may fundamentally change what succession planning looks like, where, individuals may be provided an opportunity for more nuanced paths to pinpoint and target the skills they need to progress to that next level, even if they're all potentially shooting for that same role. Am I envisioning that correctly?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
And that ties to our core mission at Workera, which is to
Okay.
unlock
Yeah.
humanity's potential. Because why box people into a certain career path or a certain ceiling if they have the skills to do the job? Like, it's okay to take a chance because you're actually reducing the risk by ensuring they have the skills needed to perform. And so you're absolutely right that what this type of assessment does is allow you to identify hidden pockets of talent,
Mm-hmm.
adjacent job roles that may have highly overlapping skill sets, but just missing one or two key pieces that you can easily teach or coach. And so the career ladder is essentially blown up
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
now you can have diagonal,
Yeah.
lateral,
Yeah.
downward, loopy-loop moves. And so there's much more fluidity in the talent marketplace. And so that this ties to the concept of a talent marketplace as well, where, it's more about matching the person to the opportunity versus putting someone on a linear path to somewhere.
Yeah. One of the things I've seen when it comes to AI, whether an AI and assessments, particularly whether it's the pre-hire or the post-hire realm, is I've seen individuals reluctant to be open to the idea that bias exists within individuals. So whether you're hiring or promoting, there are some, for the most part, or maybe more, individuals, for whatever reason, they have these biases in mind that a successful hire or a successful promotion looks like this. And it's hard to train them out of that. One of the benefits of AI is if a user were be able to find that, few tweaks and it's fixed. Whereas in the person or the group of individuals, that gets much harder to fix. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you are speaking to my soul here.
There
So
you
at
go.
Workea,
Yeah.
good. I said Workea.
Yeah.
At Workera, we always say bias is a bug and humans
Mhm.
have it. And you're absolutely right. And LLMs have been criticized for having
I was just going
inherent
to say that.
biases
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well. That being said, with proper oversight and coaching and adequate training, it's easier to identify those biases and correct them or control for them or mitigate and minimize them. Whereas we can't detect those biases as easily in humans. And even if we do detect them,
Yeah.
it's at
It's hard to
risk
tell
that they
someone.
don't
Yeah.
hear
Yeah.
the information, that they don't receive the information, that they aren't willing to correct. But even if they are willing to correct, there's no guarantee that they will correct or that it will be sustained over time. And so what you see with systems that involve human raters, I mean, I've designed a million different interview panels and all these complex rubrics designed to calibrate raters, trained raters, retrained raters. And, there's just no amount of training
Yeah.
humans that is going to keep them calibrated indefinitely. And that's certainly not the expectation of AI as well. But when you do identify a bug, it's a lot easier to fix in software than it is to fix in a human.
Yeah. And you fix it once and theoretically it's fixed forever. And so Same thing with AI. You fix it once, and all AI interviewers are then quote unquote fixed. Whereas you may be able to solve the problem in maybe one individual, one person, maybe two people, maybe a handful, but not all interviewers at the same time. And it's so
Yeah.
for, go ahead.
And you also have to keep in mind that the underlying technology is evolving rapidly.
Yeah.
So every time OpenAI comes out with a new model or Anthropic comes out with a new model, they have made strides and gains in bias mitigation. And
Yeah.
so they are actively working on some of these problems for us. And then, when we, again, because of our AI native architecture, when we're able to plug in the new model, we see immediate gains in terms of performance. And so problems that we may have been trying to prompt away or bug fix or correct, where we're seeing glitches in its judgment or its output, it's almost like overnight they're gone because the next model is so much more powerful.
Yep. So it sounds as though you're very comfortable, very familiar, almost at the edges of AI. Not everyone is quite at that level. And there's still individuals who are reluctant or even actively pushing back against it. Have you come across this? And if so, how do you help individuals kind of be okay that AI is coming and it's not all doom and gloom?
I You probably aren't surprised, but I have
Yeah.
these conversations almost daily.
Yeah.
So I'll switch hats and go
Yeah.
from my professional life to my personal life for a bit. I think I had my first conversation like this with my mom, who was just pretty skeptical and thought it was almost of an extraterrestrial
Yeah.
origin to have
Yeah.
something like this, and she really didn't have much interest in doing it. um, I tried to influence and I tried to convince and share some of the ways that I was using it, but just really wasn't resonating. But one day I saw a door open. She was preparing for her book club with her friends, and she had a bunch of stuff going on with elder care, with some other stuff, and so she was just really feeling stressed, but didn't want to let the book club down. So I walked her through how to prompt ChatGPT to help her design the book club experience and come up with thought-provoking discussion questions. And I
Yeah.
taught her a little bit about providing context. So giving the general age group, maybe some of the things that they like. They happen to like to have wine with their books. So, it gives
Yeah.
the agent a little bit of context and information to sharpen the recommendations. And she was gobsmacked. She could not believe the quality of the output. And she went around her community evangelizing AI like
There you
it
go.
was the best thing since
Yeah.
sliced bread. So one could say she is easily influenced, but I think, she's really intelligent, and, she recognized a good thing when she saw it. And that's kind of the experience that most people have when they first use it, is like, this is magic.
Yeah.
The more you use it, you start to get a little disillusioned and see some limitations, but then you kind of pivot and come back and iterate and try new things. And that's kind of how you learn. But um, I notice, though, a barrier before that even happens is that emotional barrier. So I
Mm.
kind of have this three-phase model that I think about. The first model has to do with, or the first phase has to do with emotional reactions and overcoming your emotional response to AI. You may be afraid that it's going to take your job. You may think it's unethical. You may think that it's scary. You may think it's super exciting, but you're not technically skilled. So how could you ever possibly use it? So getting past that stage is really tough. I noticed a lot of my friends being at that stage. They had never used it, and it was almost like this secret club that, and if you
Yeah.
had, and at social events, you'd kind of find the one other person that was, are you on ChatGPT? Yes, like, let's go talk about it in the corner. But I started to feel like I was getting so deep into it that it was almost, I felt like I was doing a disservice to my friends to not try to encourage them. And I posted in a local Facebook group for moms and just was trying to gauge interest. Like, would anyone be interested in a little workshop on how to use ChatGPT. You don't have, you can have used it before, but it could be you've never used it. And 300 moms
There
responded
you go.
that they
Yeah.
wanted to do this. And so I started teaching community workshops, and I wanted to do them in person because I think for a technology that is kind of scary and does have such an emotional impact on people, bringing people together for social learning, and showing, there are other people who have never done this and are taking this time for themselves, and we have this community here. So I started teaching how to parent with ChatGPT. And I think, for a lot of people, the idea of using it in your home life is also a little less stressful because you're not worried
The
about
stakes
being
aren't
like
as high.
found out
Yeah.
if your boss
Yeah.
finds out, or worried about exposing your company's data or anything like that. This is you and your agent just trying to survive the life of a parent. And so that really resonated, I think. And inevitably, folks that attended and they started to build their skills, they then felt more comfortable applying it at work. And to me, this really had a secondary benefit, which is we see that women's jobs are more likely to be displaced by AI, yet women are in the vast minority of ChatGPT users. So I think women only make up men make up 85% of ChatGPT users. And then it gets kind of even more sparse when you look at who is building these models.
Mm-hmm.
We've long known that there's a gender gap in the field of engineering. When you drill down into AI engineering, it is stark. Like we're talking 2 to 3%. So in general, men are building this technology, men are using this technology, and men are more likely to keep their jobs in spite of this technology. So it's been really amazing working with all these women and these moms to teach them how to use it to make their life easier and happier, but then also seeing them transfer those skills into work and kind of harden their careers and make and boost their job security has been so rewarding. So I know we started talking about kind of getting people into it, but it's a complicated technology to adopt. It's not just learning to press the buttons or the right sequences. There's that emotional barrier. Then its use cases are so vast. And so remembering to use it for things and experimenting and using it with new things is hard because it's just so dispersed. So if you have like a new razor, you know that you use that to shave. But if you have a new AI, what do you use it for, right? And so identifying use cases and building the muscle of actually doing it, those two things have to happen before someone is like really fluent.
Yep. And I like that how it's kind of tiptoeing. I think that may be where there's some resistance or reluctance to embrace AI, especially in the workplace, is it's just such a huge difference compared to how we've always done work. And so that change is just so dramatic. I like your approach where it's, let's take something small. I shouldn't say small, parenting is a huge deal, but something more closer to home, where it's how do we use this personally? Tiptoe there. Okay, where else can it be used? So I want to get your thoughts on this. As you were sharing, your example of working with moms, and I think that's a fantastic idea. I think more individuals would benefit from using AI in their personal lives. I actually think it might be easier. So here's where I'm going with this. The jump from, I guess, pre-computers, pre-internet, and then into computers and internet, that took a little bit more technical skill if individuals actually want to get into coding, actually want to get into, web development, things like that. I think it's less of a jump for individuals to be able to use AI, where you don't need to have all those technical abilities to be able to interact with the technology. It's everyday language. And so I think it's actually going to be easier for individuals to use AI compared to trying to figure out how to code, how to use the internet, how to do all that stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this tracks well with what
Okay.
folks call the citizen developer movement,
Okay.
where you used to have to know coding languages to write software, for example. But as coding language becomes increasingly abstract, and the most abstract is just natural language, we can now code. Like you or I could, do vibe coding
Yeah.
and create things because of the abstraction of coding language. And so that doesn't just apply to coding though, right? It can apply to other types of things. Like you could be a vibe meal planner or,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, or a vibe parenting coach, because you have this natural language. You don't have to know some inner workings of a system. You can describe what you need. One of my other favorite applications that I've seen lately that kind of gets into the
Yeah.
IO world is the idea of talking to your data. So
Mm.
instead of, having like a BI tool with all these beautiful data visualizations, you can't possibly anticipate all of the questions that someone is going to have about their data. So I've seen some really cool tools, and this is actually something we're looking into as well, is if we have all of your data, like we have it in this gigantic lake. And so what do you want to know? We
Yeah.
can serve you some insights, but we want you to ask your questions, and you don't need to be able to write code or run complex queries or, run regressions to know things. You should be able to tell your data what you want from it or ask your data questions and get answers.
Yeah, I agree. And so it's almost that barrier to entry is almost disappearing where you don't have to be, an expert coder to be able to do these really fancy visualizations or fancy analyses or even fancy rudimentary app development. The AI is going
Yeah,
to do all of that for you.
for sure.
Perfect. All right. And so going back to AI, IO, and pre-hire assessments, one of the concerns or considerations is, and I have it here as measurement invariance. One is, can you tell me more in terms of what is measurement invariance and how does that impact the AI IO dynamic?
Yeah. So without getting too technical,
Yeah.
measurement invariance is essentially is are different versions of a measure inherently measuring the same construct. So you might think of it as if you translate an assessment from English to Spanish, the words are different. The user experience could be slightly different, but at the end of the day, are we measuring the same construct in the same way? And so is the construct definition the same? Are the underlying psychometric principles the same? So is it similar level of
Yeah.
reliability, all those things? So I guess this comes up when and if you do have an AI assessment that's slightly more adaptive or more fluid, and is the underlying construct that you're measuring
Yeah.
still the same? And I go back to the interview here. It's
Yeah.
one of the most predictive pre-hire assessments out there because you can tie it to job relevant constructs, but allow for a little bit of probing and digging to get specificity and precision. So that's how I view an AI assessment. Obviously, it has to be developed with that underlying construct in
Hmm.
mind. And so this is where I see a lot of AI assessments go awry and not follow psychometric practices by just doing something that sounds cool or
Yeah.
without a consideration for the underlying measurement model. And so one thing that's just very critical is to ground each version of the assessment in the same competency model or in the
Yeah.
same construct definition or in the same skills framework or the same personality framework. So as long, in my opinion, if you have that strong foundation and give some guardrails around how free the agent is to veer off
Yeah.
the primary path, or can they riff or can they probe or you can give explicit instructions. You could have an AI run a deterministic assessment, but that's not necessarily taking full advantage of its ability to probe and get to a more precise measurement.
Gotcha. And so kind of bringing it all the way down to if I wanted to explain this, let's say to my dad who has no idea what IO is. So I get the impression that measurement and variance. So let's say I wanted to assess someone's ability to do addition. I can ask 2 plus 2 or I can ask 3 plus 3. I can use either one of those. In theory, again, we'll never know 100% certainty. Both of those assess someone's
I think
ability.
are able to add numbers
Okay,
better
if
than
they
odd
do.
numbers,
Yeah.
but where you're going is right because
Okay.
it's adding the same single digit. Like that's the skill, right?
Yeah.
And there are different operationalizations of measuring that skill, but that granular skill is the same. And which brings up another good point. You know, it's not just both of these are measuring the same construct. So if you look at something like communication,
Hmm.
that can be defined in a million different ways.
Yeah.
So the other aspect of that measurement and variance is the underlying construct needs to be well defined and down to a granular level so that you know your communication is apples to apples with my communication, because there's so many different ways to define it. So like when we're doing skill assessments, we're defining a skill domain down to a very, very granular level, like a specific task or behavior, so that even if your assessment is different from mine, we are assessing that you have the same granular skills and
Hmm.
behavioral capacity as I do.
So with that, one of the things that I've seen over, as my career as an IO, I've seen KSAs be embedded within assessments. Then I've seen the transition over to competencies, and it seems as though we may be transitioning back out into skills. Is
Correct.
that what you're seeing?
Yes, absolutely. And it to me,
Yeah.
it's old wine in new
There you
bottles.
go. Yeah, yeah,
And but I'm here for it because never have I seen job analysis so popular
yeah.
as when the skill-based organization concept has emerged. It feels like for the first time, companies are recognizing the value in breaking jobs down into tasks and then coming to understand what skills are needed to perform those tasks. So I don't care what you call it.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah.
process and the rigor and the granularity that we are now using to understand work. And I honestly attribute it to AI because for two reasons. Well, first off, AI skills or skills to use AI is one of the first cross-cutting skill sets that we've seen emerge and come about so quickly that people need to understand what does it mean to be able to do this skill? How are
Yeah.
people using it? What tasks are they using it for? So our methodologies as IOs of decomposing work and then figuring out what workers need to have or do to do those things, that is a very helpful tool for understanding how to make your workforce AI ready. So that's the one thing. And then two, because of the power of AI,
Yeah.
we're better able to model skills and understand skills and see the flow of skills and just handle so much more data and bring so much more definition to work. So those two things combined, I think we can at least partially thank for the explosion in the
Yeah.
concept of a skill-based organization. And like I said, I don't care what they call it, but the fact
Yeah.
that we are actually studying work and how it gets done and what people need to be able to do it is amazing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's going to be a key cornerstone of AI. So I think the transition from KSAs to competencies, the reason that took place is there were just too many. There were so many KSAs that need to be, and the job analysis process itself is very time consuming, very resource intensive. And so it got a lot of love for a little bit, but then people recognize this is just a lot of work. And then I think that's why they condensed it down into competencies to make it kind of bundle them into one overarching competency or behavior. But now that we have AI coming online, it can handle all of that data pretty
Yes.
easily. So
And
we
the
don't
level
have,
of detail.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
And so
yeah, exactly.
we have the ability to be able to, really get granular and be more precise and specific. Because I think that's one of the potential drawbacks in using competencies or competency modeling is that they're a little broad or they're a little vague. And to your point, communication. What exactly do we mean by that? And so if we split it down, and as you were sharing that, I was thinking, verbal versus nonverbal. That's getting a little bit more precise. But if we leave it at the umbrella of communication, that may get lost. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
and I think that's a big trade-off too, because like if you get more and more granular, though, you also start to see frameworks diverge. So, what constitutes communication in your organization may be different from mine, or even within an organization, marketing could define it like this, sales could define it like this, operations could define it like this. And so there is another trend in the skills in the skills industry right now around skill harmonization. And like, yes, we can let all these skills and become very granular and diverge and become hyper specific for the role. But at the end of the day, we do need a way to harmonize the skills so that we can do some of those more macro aggregate decision making, planning, understanding our workforce capabilities. So and it's funny because in my AI classes, the way that I talk about generative AI is it's like an accordion. It expands language and it contracts language, and it expands language and it contracts
Yeah.
language. And so that's kind of what we see happening with skills and competencies. You know, AI can summarize a cluster of skills and give it a name, or it can take a cluster of skills,
Yeah.
tease them apart, and make them hyper specific to a role. So the accordion motif really kind of carries through there.
Yeah. So what I really like about the work that you're doing is I think when it comes to assessments and AI specifically, I always need to have a key seat at the table. Whereas if we're not there, data may come about, relationships may come about where it may be, for lack of a better term, illegal or discriminatory. If, let's say just a raw machine learning individual just crunching all kinds of numbers finds out this relationship without taking a second to think, okay, ethically, morally, is this a relationship we should be looking at? So I like that you're pushing IOs have a seat at the table, that they're on the forefront. Why else do you think it's important for IOs to be at that table with that conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's not only, it's not like we are given a seat at that table,
Yeah,
like
we
you
got to
have to
take
push for it.
it.
You
Yeah,
have to take it. And the main reason that's important is because this technology is going to evolve without us if we're not there. And the use of this technology is going to happen whether or not we're at that table. I have felt very compelled to elbow my way
yeah,
into these types of software companies where they are using a powerful technology and being innovative and creating a really cool product. But at the end of the day, it's measuring humans, and the people who are implementing it and using the data and making decisions based on those data are also humans. And so the role of behavioral science, and in particular IO psychology, given our understanding of employment law
yeah,
and the psychology of the employee experience, it's really critical that we're at the heart of an AI transformation or in the implementation of an AI tool that affects humans. So to me, it's more than just kind of a calling. It's an imperative, and we really need to be leaning in and not being afraid of the technology ourselves. Going through that change curve
yeah,
where we're adjusting our own
yeah.
reactions and beliefs, we are practicing and coming to find use cases that are helpful for us in our productivity and our happiness. And then from there, becoming fluent and comfortable in talking about this technology and how it intersects with our role and in the ways the business works in general. We have a really unique skill set to do that.
Yep, 100%. And so I think so far our conversation, we've been talking a lot about kind of the benefits, the good side of AI, where it can be more predictive, more inclusive, fairer, more precise. It can crunch a lot of data. But there's also another side to that coin. And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on this, where in popular media, depending on who you follow, who you listen to, there is the potential for AI to take a lot of work away from individuals. What are your thoughts on that? And yeah, we'll see where this takes us.
Yeah, it's definitely something that is top of mind. And I don't really know the answer. And I, especially with thinking of things like new graduates, I go back and forth in trying to decide, is this creating more opportunities for them
Yeah.
or less? Like at first I thought it's less, and there's some research to suggest that that's the case. But then I also think, or is it just moving them up the skill tree
Yeah.
and getting them into more sophisticated jobs and having them skip entry level? But naturally, in the way orgs are structured,
Yeah.
there are fewer of those, mid-level, journeyman level roles. And so I have to believe we're going to have to change how we think about entry level work and
Yeah.
how we're able to take advantage of humans' potential. I also think at the same time, our education system is going to evolve, and the feeder talent that's coming out of this system will be more prepared for a world where AI is a coworker.
Yeah.
I believe that most people are going to end up supervising a number of agents to do their job, even if they're entry level. We're already seeing this for sure. And it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think we've already seen that it does take jobs.
Yeah.
Secretly in the back of my mind, I wish that this just meant a 4-day work week for
I like
everybody.
that. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in our capitalistic society,
Yeah. Yeah.
we will never do it, because it's just who can get further faster. And so sacrificing a day of work is, would put you behind. But if we can do more with less, wouldn't it be amazing if we could take better care of ourselves and make work better for our lives? I have those types of aspirations, more than I feel held back by the fear of what this has to do or what this might do for the
Yeah.
availability of work.
So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. As you were sharing entry level roles, maybe, there's less of them. So individuals are going to be starting maybe higher up the career ladder. But I think there's this perception where, and this may be for individuals who have spent a little more time in the workplace, maybe come from a different generation, that those quote unquote entry level individuals didn't put in the work, or they didn't, put in the time to be eligible for those higher level positions. Do you see that as a potential issue where, organizations may be reluctant to hire entry level positions, even if we do supplement their skill set with AI because they haven't, quote unquote, put in the work?
It's a great question. And, that's again where this idea
Yeah.
of a skill-based meritocracy
Mm-hmm.
matters so much. And so if we can get people focused more on, do they have the skills versus how many years of experience
Yeah.
they have, I think we may see some of that start to go down. I also think that generations like millennials and Gen Z have seen plenty of examples of these rapid ascenders and really accelerated careers, and harnessing certain types of technology can really fast track someone. Where I think about it is more on like the socio-emotional side and like leadership skills and some of those
Gotcha.
more interpersonal and like strategy type thinking, where you need to have spent some time in an organization to understand how the architecture of a company works, how information flows, how there are dependencies in politics and different personalities and different personas in the company. So I do think there's a risk of that. You see this a little bit with like
Yeah.
gifted programs in school, where you take a kid and put them a grade ahead. Yes, they can do the math, but
Yeah.
they can't focus or hold still, or
Yeah.
or have the
The
self-control to
social.
sit
Yeah.
through, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same. I would imagine we would see the same thing, where maybe technically and skill wise they're there, when it comes to the harder skills, but some of those more durable, hard
Yeah.
learned skills or wisdom,
Yeah.
maybe a bit more lacking.
Yep. And to your point, I think AI is going to be a nice supplement. So let's say someone does come in with just the raw horsepower and they're able to, hit the ground running technically, but they're rough around the edges. And so I think AI can be a nice coach, a nice, supplemental tool or, friend, if you will, to help an individual develop into that space or into that role.
Yeah, totally possible. I do think, to go back to the dark side, there is a risk
Yeah.
though. And I was just watching a little podcast this morning, where we are seeing all-time lows in employee engagement and feelings of connectedness. And so, yes, we can rely more and more on AI, but when it comes to those core, like bottom level Maslow's needs, like
Yeah.
need to belong, need for social interaction, I do worry about that. And I think that I've experienced that some in my own career, and I'm a heavy AI user, and
Yeah.
sometimes I rely on it where, man, actually just talking to
Yeah.
someone would be a richer and probably more effective way to get this information. And so I find myself kind of craving speed and
Yeah.
craving answers. And I'm not as appreciative of like the
Yeah.
journey to get to an answer as much. And that journey is sometimes what makes us feel human.
Yeah.
And so without it, we're kind of dehumanizing ourselves a little bit. And I think that is is leading to some of this feeling of disengagement, or kind of operating on the work versus in the work.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so as you were sharing that, individuals are becoming less engaged in the workplace. And I was thinking, okay, I have AI bubbling around. I have less engagement bubbling around. And I was also reading an article that mid organizations are looking at potentially flattening out and getting rid of that mid-manager level. And so I'm thinking, okay, if engagement is down, but AI usage theoretically is up, is there the opportunity to have individuals be more engaged? And this is going to be an oddball opinion, but I'm really curious to get your thoughts on this. Can so I'm just gonna spitball this.
Just throw it out
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So in theory, if a CEO wanted to, they can develop really rich and really robust relationships with all of their employees, no matter how many they have. They can, in theory, create, I don't want to say a perfect replica, but a
An
version of them.
avatar.
Yeah, where they can have a unique relationship with each individual employee. Would that, do you think, increase engagement, or do we see that as kind of awkward and that doesn't it's weird. What are your thoughts there?
Well, if we go all the way back to our leadership theory, we know that two things are really important: initiating structure and consideration. So people want guidance and structure and help prioritizing their work. I think an AI would be fantastic at that. But they also want consideration. And consideration isn't generic niceties. It is, as a leader, I know your situation, your hopes, your dreams, your goals, and I am tailoring my interactions with you because I, as a human, care about you and am considerate of who you are and where you're going. I don't think that an AI will be able to fully replicate that or substitute for that. Maybe it could be a co-pilot for the
Mhm.
CEO, but unless an employee believes that the avatar is genuinely considerate of them as an individual, um,
Yeah.
I don't think we'll be there for a while.
Okay. The reason I bring this up is I don't know how far in development this is, but I remember hearing online there is the potential for individuals, and I forget the platform, where they can talk to their celebrities like in real time. And the person, so the customer in this case would not know if the celebrity was real or not, if they were or an AI copy of the individual. And so from a user's perspective, if I don't know if this person is the real person or the AI person, but I enjoy that interaction, is that still beneficial? It starts getting into this weird kind of ethical dilemma or this ethical world.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I mean,
what are your
basically what you're
thoughts?
telling me, my spouse always says that I have a social relationship with Taylor Swift.
Okay,
So
there you
you're
go.
saying that I could actually have
A
a
phone call. Yeah,
non-parasocial and a
yeah,
real relationship.
yeah. In theory.
Maybe.
Yeah,
I think the hard thing for me, and it's the same thing, is that I can trick myself into thinking that she is, or this person, I
yeah,
don't have
yeah.
to use her, is conscious of this interaction and it means something to her like it means something to me. And until I think we're at the AGI phase, like true sentience and true consciousness in these alternate AI beings, I just don't see that as being, a rewarding enough experience to sustain any type of meaningful long-term relationship. And now we're going to see, examples of where that's not the case. The movie
Yeah,
Her, and
yeah.
you read all these articles about people falling in love with their AI. And hey, my friends and I joke that like the thing that we'll deal with is when our kid brings their AI girlfriend home, and
Yeah,
as parents, we're accepting that lifestyle.
yeah.
Um, but I think until someone genuinely, in their heart of hearts believes that that other being cares for them out of their own brain and their own consciousness, we won't be able to capture that true connection.
Gotcha. All right. So I wanted to circle back on something you talked about. You talked about education and how the future of education might need to look a little bit different. I'm going to take that one step further, and I'm wondering, one, so graduate or not graduate, degrees in general, graduation from a university was kind of seen as, you've made it. An individual graduates from college and they're, X% more likely to make X amount of dollars over their lifetime over someone who didn't. Right now, we're seeing unemployment for graduates versus non-graduates to be roughly the same. And so the value proposition when it comes to earning a degree or continuing down, even getting higher and higher degrees may not necessarily be there. Is that a concern? And what do you see us potentially, how do you see us potentially navigating this issue moving forward?
Yeah, I definitely think this is such an interesting
Yeah.
trend. And if you just go to basic economics and its supply and demand, we have a large supply of white collar roles that we don't have as much of a demand for because those roles are more susceptible to automation. But where you do see demand is for your tradespeople, your craftspeople, your
Yeah.
electricians, your plumbers, your bus drivers, your this, your that. I do think there is a chance that over time the economics shift in that favor too. And so the salaries and compensation for some of these less automatable roles will necessarily go up because the demand is high. And I mean, won't that be great when our elementary school teachers and our bus drivers that take our kids to school safely actually are paid at,
Yeah.
a level that's commensurate with their value to society? Not saying that other more highly
Yeah.
paid
Yeah.
roles aren't having that value, but I think it's a really interesting future to consider where some of these skilled labor roles are recognized for kind of being the backbone and having such a critical role in our infrastructure. I know my nephew is in the stage of
Yeah.
trying to plan a career and is kind of on the fence about advanced education versus
Yeah.
more of a craftsperson role. And I'm pushing him hard, like go learn to be an electrician
Yeah.
or, a carpenter. Like the job security is great. You can at least push off worrying about AI for a little
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have an answer there,
Yeah.
but it's
Well,
something that I'm thinking about a lot. I have young kids and
yeah.
I often think like, what are they going to do? What are they
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
be? Like, of course, they say they're going to be an NBA player in Spider-Man, and
There you
I
go.
don't think
Fight
that those
crime.
roles are as automatable, thankfully.
Yeah.
So they should have pretty good job security there. But I do really think about that. Like, is college going to be a thing, and what is that going to look like? But I can tell you one thing I'm doing is teaching them how to prompt. So
Okay.
again, they're really young, 6 and 4, and I'm not, letting them loose on ChatGPT, but I use it with them at night to write bedtime stories. So I'm teaching them how to prompt who is the story about? What's the problem that they're trying to solve? What kind of world are they in? What kind of tone should the story? Should it rhyme? Should it be a song? And what are they trying to do? Who's the bad guy? And so this idea of story writing is very similar to providing an LLM with context. What's the role? What's the problem? What are the constraints? What's the instruction? What do you want out of it? And so learning some of these prompting frameworks, you start to get a lot better at it versus just your random one shot questions. So I'm trying to help my kids think a little bit more computationally when they have a problem. I'm trying to help them like, let's break it down and consider like, what are the parts here? What
Mhm.
what can you delegate? What
Yeah.
can what
Yeah.
can you use math to solve versus what do you need to actually think through? And so I I hope that
Yeah.
will help them in this brave new world, but um, we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to your point, I actually think we're coming full circle as kind of a human race. So here's what I mean by that. Early in our evolution, as we started to really think about logic, that was a big deal in like Greek philosophy, Roman philosophy, where they would spend a huge amount of time just debating really ethical, moral related questions. We kind of stepped away from that, really started to pursue scientific endeavors, really got really good at that. I think AI is going to start doing a lot of that heavy lifting, and we may come full circle again where questions on is this or ethically correct? Is this morally correct? Should individuals be engaging in this work? Should I delegate? What am I good at versus what is the AI good at? I think we're to come back around to where those are going to be the new, what's the word that I'm looking for? Technical skills or technical abilities that are going to be successful at the job. Whereas AI, it can farm out all the high level technical analyses, visualization, all that stuff. But we're going to need somebody to interpret. So I think all of that said, I think the fundamental question is going to be not can we do this, but should we do this? And I
Yeah.
think that is going to be the core of the skill set needed to be successful in the future. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're starting to see some of this with
Okay.
like more modern forms of workforce planning, where this is an element that's being considered, this kind of human automation scale, and like how easy is it to automate, and then how ethical is it to automate.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when we're considering decomposing work and mapping out the jobs to be done or the tasks to be done, we're thinking more about that human automation balance. And I think that will become a dimension, almost as, you know, and when you think of older forms of job analysis, like
Yeah.
how dangerous is a task, that would relate to how compensable or how much money that task would be paid. So, you know, moving forward, we might think of the human automation scale, like the more human the task needs to be, the more compensable that factor will be.
Gotcha.
Um, so just if
Yeah.
I'm kind of riffing off
Yeah.
of where you're going, and I think to some extent we'll do that, and we will map that work out. But I also do wonder if at some point AI usage, well, AI technology will advance to a point, and AI usage will advance to a point that we do have kind of a new renaissance, and
Yeah.
we are doing things that we don't think or know are possible right now. I mean, that's the hope and that's the promise of AI. Um,
Yeah.
you, different people have different
Yeah.
opinions on whether that promise will be realized or whether, you know, we're at the peak hype cycle and it's going to go down from here. I know a lot of people had like very, very high hopes for GPT-5. Like
hmm
the idea was that it was going to be AGI and it was going to be sentient, and not so
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
but maybe GPT-6.
Yeah. I'm thinking it's just a matter of time. I think it's not a matter of if, I think it's a matter of when. I think we inevitably are going to get there.
Yeah. And the other question to your point, like regarding ethics and things like that, the law is so far behind. And so um how will the law keep up? And so the legal system is probably going to have to evolve infrastructurally to be able to keep up with the technology, because it's not going to be beneficial from a national economic standpoint, a national security standpoint, to harness and pull back advancement in this space. Like we need to progress to be competitive and to ensure national security, but our legal system needs to keep pace, and it can't just pull back and put restrictions, because, you know, I think that's equally as risky. So that's another area that a space to watch, if you will,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
infrastructurally how do legal systems change.
So speaking of that, I came across a news article. It got a little dark. So it was a news article where it was a teenage boy. So the parents got this individual, this teenage boy, ChatGPT to help with his schoolwork. Still in high school, still navigating, still trying to figure out his. Have you heard of this story by any
No,
chance? Ooh, okay. So this is, I didn't know how to
I'm
react to
nervous.
this. Yeah. So this boy started developing, a pretty close, almost like father-son kind of relationship with ChatGPT, and he started to ideate on, self-harm. And he would ask ChatGPT for advice. I'm feeling this way. ChatGPT would respond, even to the point where, the kid said something along the lines of, I had marks on my neck and I wanted to see if my parents would notice. They didn't notice. I don't know how to react to this. ChatGPT just still had its own conversation with the child. And then the child started asking it questions on how to, see this idea to fruition. And ChatGPT gave him recommendations. And the boy ended up following through with those recommendations. And now the parents are upset at ChatGPT because they were not notified that this conversation was happening. And so I don't know who is at fault there. Is it the
Yeah.
parents? Is it ChatGPT? Is it the child? Is it the society? Is it the school? Who?
Yeah.
And that's where they left it, is it's not really clear what
Yeah.
would have been the ethical approach to solving this situation. I'm not
Yeah.
expecting you to have an answer, but I'm curious to hear your
I
thoughts.
can certainly think about it though with you.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen similar trajectories with social media, where, you know, you can report if there is a post that's concerning or seems harmful, but obviously the difference is when you're in a conversation with ChatGPT, that's a one-on-one thing, whereas social media, lots of people can see when
Yeah.
someone is unraveling or
Yeah.
at risk of self-harm or harming others. So I think it a lot of work is done on the foundational models to avoid these types of toxic and harmful topics, but obviously there's edge cases and there's prompt injection techniques that can kind of get you around, and it's certainly not a perfect system. So I could totally see there being some type of reporting thing where if a child is under a certain age and has a certain topic, their parents are notified, but you know
Yeah.
the
It gets
terms of
tricky.
service for most of these models say that individuals under, I think it's 13, should not use it at all, even with a parent, and individuals from 13 to 18 should use it with a parent. And that's not because it's it's like dangerous to their schoolwork or something. It
Yeah.
is because they don't have the emotional and psychological maturity to understand the difference
Hmm.
between human and not human. And I think that they far overinterpret who and what they're interacting with. So, but they don't, these these companies can't necessarily enforce that. So as a
Yeah.
parent, I do view it as my responsibility to regulate what my children have access to. And, they a lot of times come across content that I don't want them to have. But it's not just always locking it down, it's also having conversations around some of the risks and like what's real and what's not real. And I think parents being aware of these LLMs being in existence and kids wanting to use them, it's best to just have a conversation around what it is, what it can do, what it can't do, what the risks are, and how to use it safely. And I think schools can help with that as well. A lot of corporate education in this space has to do with, recognizing hallucinations and recognizing the limitations of AI and responsible AI. And that's in most of the corporate training programs that I've been a part of. That responsible and ethical component is on balance with learning how to prompt,
Yeah.
learning about the underlying technology. So I do think that's promising, and that most companies are thinking about the ethical
Hmm.
and responsible side of things in the same
Yeah.
vein.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this harkens back to we've got to go back to the fundamentals, ethics, morals, foundationally are what are our principles moving forward? So I agree with that 10,000%. So transitioning now to something a little bit lighter. So let's go back to the light side, if you will. Organizations, they may be potentially restructuring. What I mean by that is traditionally we have an org chart where different divisions with specific roles exist in these silos, and this is how the organization is structured. With the advent of skills, AI being to manage successfully, or pretty successfully, thousands, if not millions of different skills, the organizational structure itself might change.
Yeah.
What do you think that might look like?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah,
And I think we've seen some initial previews of what
yeah.
this could look like. I mentioned earlier the idea of a talent marketplace
Hmm.
where there's kind of a democratic presentation.
Yeah,
Everyone has their skills on display. The work and the jobs to be done and the projects that someone can work on are on display. And there's this kind of organic, agentic matching process where it's not me hiring someone for a job. They can indicate that they're a match for the job. So the talent marketplace, the gig economy,
yeah,
these different types of more fluid person job or task matching
yeah,
are there. They're not widespread. I was reading an article the other day though that an org chart may look more like a work chart moving forward, where again we're taking that job analysis approach and
yeah,
really breaking down the tasks that need to be done. So to complete this project, what are the tasks and what skills do we need on this project team? Where are those in the organization? Who of those people are available and not on another project or do have some bandwidth, and then assembling. We've been experimenting with this some, and again, though, the risk is people like being part of a team. They
yeah,
like having some stability and some familiar faces, and that team is part of their identity. So if we go down this like totally decomposed, task level jobs or, you know, temporary assemblies of people to solve a specific problem, it does make you wonder what happens to the concept of a team. And how do people derive their identity from work?
Yeah. Not only that, but the concept of an employee, the concept of an organization. It's like, what does that all
And
really
a
mean? And
career. Yeah.
yeah, like what does that all really mean? So I I came across an article where this is partially in existence already in a couple of different industries. One of the one that I really never thought of is the movie industry, where people come together with all these tasks that need to be completed. They're
Yeah,
focused
they're
together on,
gigs.
yeah, and they're I mean that industry is what 100, 150 years old, and they're completely comfortable with it. And you'll see certain teams consistently come together. Like the ones that come to mind are like the Adam Sandler group, where it's
Yeah.
usually the same crew, you know, movie after movie after movie, or the Quentin Tarantino group. Like they're
Hmm.
always in the same movies over and over and over again. So that may
Yeah.
be a different way to be an employee. It's like rather than an organization itself, I'm a part of this team, and the organization can contract with this team or something along those lines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it's an astute observation and a great example of what this might look like. I mean, you see the same thing with like musical bands that
Yeah,
may not
yeah,
always be together, but they just get together to kind of do their local pub or something where I have a gig and I'm going to meet some people that I haven't played with before and we're going to jam. And,
yeah.
you know, it could go well, it might not, but there's a very kind of a loose selection process there, but it's, you know, for
Yeah.
some of these, it is that familiarity. Now, I wonder if, you know, Adam Sandler decided to retire, how would
Yeah.
they replace, you know, is it a skills assessment?
There you go. They might use work era.
Maybe, maybe.
Perfect. Cool. So yeah, we've talked about a lot today. We've definitely covered a lot of ground. AI, IO, the future of work, what that might look like. We talked about a couple of, you know, tangential topics, if you will. Gone into that. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about before we call it a day?
I'm all good. This was a great conversation, and I hope that, you know, it's got some folks' wheels turning
Yeah.
about the art of the possible and what the future might bring. Certainly nobody knows for sure, but I think we do ourselves a great service by letting our brains go here and have these thoughts, because I would much rather be prepared for something that's almost going to happen
Yeah.
than not having thought about it at all.
100%. I thought this was a great conversation. If people wanted to connect with you or learn more about what you're doing, where would you recommend they go?
So they can look me up on LinkedIn, Taylor Sullivan, PhD, and I'm again at Workera. Or you can email me at taylor@workera.ai.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, it was a great conversation, Taylor. Thank you for the time, and you have a good
Thanks.
one.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.